Last Pint Productions presents The New Way. The New Way contains adult content, including Dazed and Confused slackers on tape before sunset, recalling their boyhood with the Newton boys at a school of rock with Bernie and the last flag flying over a fast food nation where everybody wants some before midnight's game against the Bad News Bears in this waking life suburbia with me and Orson Welles playing with his scanner darkly before sunrise. Listener discretion is advised.
Mortuary science at McNeese State.
Yes, sir.
Play any ball over there?
No, sir. I wanted to concentrate on my studies as much as I loved football and whatnot.
What about me would you like to change?
That's another one of your can't-win questions. I'm not answering that.
I want to tell you about a dream I once had. I know that's, when someone says that, that's usually you're in for a very boring next few minutes.
All right, Mr. Gielgud. Sing me something. Astonish me.
Everybody wants to be naked and famous. Everybody wants to be just like me and naked.
Will you help teach me about this? What is it? A new way?
Hello out there, and welcome to the New Way podcast, coming to you from Last Pint Production Studios in rainy South Florida. This is the New Way, where we dissect pop culture so you don't have to. I am Matt, and I'm joined in the studio by my hetero life mate, Mr. Benjamin Scott Wilson. How's it going, Ben?
It's going, although it's not raining right now.
It was raining earlier.
We prefer for it. For
people to assume it's sunny all the time.
Yeah, it's sunny all the time. It's always sunny in Boynton Beach, Florida.
Okay, we're gonna get sued for that one. So
it's always sunny in Matt's studio. No, that just sounds like you're a predator.
Yeah, that's weird. I don't like that at all. I prefer you take all of those things you said back. We unfortunately do not have Nick. He is on assignment right now in Los Angeles, attempting to track down women with eyebrows. And when he finds them, he will talk about them on the podcast.
By on assignment, you mean stalking Cara Delevingne.
Predatory.
It's always sunny in actually, mostly is always sunny in Los Angeles.
I learned maybe it was yesterday that her name is Cara Delevingne and not Cara Delevingne. Nick's been saying it wrong in his sleep, and on all of those messages he left on her voicemail all this time.
Wow, that's the reason she never returned his calls.
That's right. She was like, well, what an asshole! Doesn't even know my name. That's what she sounds like. By the way, that's why. And none of you can contest because you don't know what she sounds like either. That she very well could sound exactly like that.
All you have is her accent in Valerium or whatever it is. Valerian.
Valerian. I was going to call it Valero. I'm like, that's a gas station. Valero, not Valero. God damn it. That movie is actually not a bad movie.
But that's also to presuppose that you actually saw Valerian.
I did. I watched it in 4K, actually, because I wanted to see it on the screen, and it is beautiful. And you know what else the movie is? Beautiful. And it's very good to look at.
I've seen like 10 minutes of it, and I was like, I'll dive into this at one point, but I got other stuff higher on my list.
I think honestly, with a little casting, a couple casting changes, and unfortunately one of them is the great Dane DeHaan, who I like quite a bit, but he is not. He's not a Bruce Willis type.
The perennially miscast Dane DeHaan.
Yeah, he is not. It is a terrible casting for him.
I legitimately like Dane DeHaan too. And the only thing, ironically, that I've seen him in recently that I thought was pretty good is that Gore Verbinski movie, the one with the mental asylum. Where he
I haven't seen that. I heard about it.
So it obviously didn't stick out that much because the movie is not good. It's not a good movie at all. But he is actually pretty well cast in the role.
Okay,
and is right down the middle. Like does a really good job down the middle. I was just like, oh yeah, there's Dane DeHaan. He's actually a pretty decent actor.
He is good in things. He's great in Chronicle. And they just need to find good roles. Maybe he'll show up on a podcast topic.
He is not a good Green Goblin.
No. Maybe we'll. This is a topic we've been flirting with about going back to. So you guys know out there are 32 episodes of the show that we tend to say are
31
unlistenable. 31, yeah. 31 episodes that are unlistenable.
Well, technically there are 32, and there was one we never posted. Because...
Oh yeah, there's only one that didn't make it because it was Nick and me, and it was very bad. But
no, actually, that was pretty nice.
Oh, there were two. There were a couple of them actually.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, we we've lost a couple episodes in there, but yeah, the original run is not terrible, but I think we're going to start kind of cherry picking some of those topics that we did in the first couple of, I guess, call it the season of the show, and doing those again because there's a lot of stuff that we did. Chick flicks, we did musicals, we did.
It was long enough ago. I mean, we're talking about 6 years plus in some cases, where not only has there been 6 years worth of pop culture and media that we've had to digest since then, but I'm sure our perspectives have changed a little bit.
Sure.
Over the interim of that. So,
well, I mean, and all those episodes are pre-Cats trailer, which is really how we're going to define the podcast from now on is PCT, and PCT and ACT.
Well, I was about to say, so you mean everything from here on out is not PC on the podcast?
This is correct. That is correct. We are after Cats, ACT baby,
AC PC.
Ben, you said there are some things you wanted to discuss ahead of the podcast today. Let's hear from you.
Oh, sure. Well, so there was a show that I know that Matt watched last year. I just want to bring it up really quickly because I found myself in the rare situation where I was at home with the girls asleep, and I knew I had a few hours to kill last night. I was like, I'm going to hop on the my exercise bike or whatever. And
I was with your wife last night.
I know you were. And so, well, I figured if you guys were getting a workout, then I had to get one too. No, so I plopped the exercise bike down in front of the TV, and I was just like, what? Besides baseball, because I was watching some baseball kind of intermittently here now, I was like, what can I stick on that I've wanted to watch for a long time that my wife will not watch? And my wife won't watch horror. Especially ever since she used to. I remember, like, we have memories of us going to see, like, the first Paranormal Activity.
Yeah, you guys gave me a good review of that movie.
Yeah, I mean, we saw a bunch of stuff when we first started dating, but I think I don't know if it's since we've had the kids or if it was just that Beth humored me back then and just won't humor me anymore. She doesn't like to watch creepy stuff. She got a little too creeped out in this most recent season of Stranger Things. I mean, there are times when it was a little bit too gross and too creepy for her. Then she would have to kind of divert her attention for a little bit. But so because I had heard good things and because I know that they've announced a second season, I went and dove in. I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to watch the pilot of The Haunting of Hill House.
Oh, yeah.
I like Mike Flanagan through interviews. I kind of liked Oculus. I think I've seen maybe parts of one of the other movies that he's done.
And I never saw Oculus.
But Oculus is actually pretty good. And I want to watch Gerald's Game because
I want to see that too.
That's interesting, and I know that it's got the crossover in the casting there.
Yeah.
With Gina. Oh, actually,
Carla Gugino.
Carla Gugino. Yeah. I always get Carla Gugino.
Gina Cargulo.
No, I always get Carla Gugino and Gina Gershon mixed up.
That's not a bad three-way.
No, you said it, not me.
I did. That's my fault.
But I really do like Carla Gugino, actually.
Yeah.
And I ended up watching 3.5 episodes. Like basically turned it off because it was after midnight and Beth had gone to bed, and I was just like, I'm getting freaked out.
Yeah, it is scary.
So the thing is I had expected something more along the lines of Oculus, where there's a lot of well constructed but still sort of viscerally cheap scares with kind of the jump scare. Now, a lot of people will just say, for example, like the Red Letter Media thing, I still remember when they saw Hereditary last year. Yeah. They had this huge gag at the beginning. They were just like, let's talk about Hereditary. It's like, what do you think about Hereditary? And they go, no, jump scares. And like fireworks go off and like pop things because obviously jump scares are cheap. However, I think they're well placed in some movies and the context, as long as they're not overused.
And Hereditary actually technically does have one giant jump scare in it.
The gigantic one.
Yes.
Yes. Which is
out
terrifying.
Of nowhere. Yeah, it's very terrifying.
And the build up to that one jump scare is terrifying as well. But so I was expecting something that was a lot more akin to the jump scare every 5 minutes and like ghosts and things moving around the background everywhere. And it's such a wonderful, slow burn family drama that just happens to have ghosts in it.
Yes.
And it's really really, really awesome.
I mean, it's a story about abuse. I mean, it's essentially the whole thing is like The Shining's about alcoholism. This is a story about abused children growing up and what happens to them. And I will tell you, it has a pretty amazing reveal in it. I won't spoil for you, but there's some great stuff they set up in that series slowly, like very slowly through all of it. But great acting. I think probably the weakest I think is between Hutton and who plays the younger version of him? It's
Michael Thomas.
Yeah, Michael
or Henry Thomas.
Henry Thomas. Yeah, I didn't quite buy the two of them as like the same human being.
Well, strangely enough, I actually thought the exact opposite.
Oh, really?
The first 3.5 episodes, but the thing that you have to realize in the first 3.5 episodes, Hutton's only in the first episode. I don't think Hutton has.
He doesn't really come in till
he hasn't showed back up
like
yet.
6 or 7, I think, into it.
But. So the thing is I was actually kind of surprised in the first episode. I was like, oh, I feel like it wasn't so much that they were. And how it felt more like Henry Thomas was doing an impression of.
He's trying harder than It goes kind of one way, but yeah, it's a really well cast series. It's very atmospheric. Some of the ghost design is very inventive and cool.
And like the thing, like I said, is it's not the jump scares feel completely kind of earned, and they also set them up in the context where it's just like you get the jump scare and then you realize that like, oh, this thing is happening to all of these people at the same time. And so it's giving it some context where it's not just there for the sake of being there. It's actually there's actually some reason why something is happening to these people or why there is, because there's nothing I hate more than in a horror movie, somebody feels somebody get into bed with them and they turn around and it's a dead person in bed with them and then they wake up from the dream.
Yeah.
Which happens. It's an easy trick. And it happens. It does happen a lot.
A lot of movies.
It happens in a lot of the movies. And it happens in that show quite a few times. But they contextualize it of being like, oh, it's 303, something bad's happening. And this is happening to all. And they structure it in a way where you kind of slowly realize that there's some interconnectivity between these moments.
Yes.
And it actually retroactively gives the moments more gravity.
And they do there's a very, very good puzzle building they do in it. That's kind of what I'm talking about with the reveal and how that works. And it's a really great method of telling a ghost story because you're watching all of these different kids. They're kind of as younger and as adults and how it all connects. Right. And each episode's giving you more and more toward what you've already seen.
And at multiple stages of when they're adults, too. Because you have them sort of in the present day, quote unquote, but then you see them 8 years before that, and then you see them 6 years before that. Yeah. You see the way that they got to be kind of into their current adulthood states. But I still remember, so the thing I told Beth last night, as soon as she got back home from your guys' romp.
And what a romp it was.
What a romp it was.
All right.
Sorry, that's a little early, but I had to.
But I said the one of the more effective things I loved about it, and because I really like the direction, I really like everything. The first episode is called Steven Sees a Ghost. And it sets it up from the very get-go that Steven is the oldest child who is a complete skeptic for myriad reasons. And it's so that it's going to happen in the episode. And so it just from the name of the episode, it builds. And so it gets so close to the end of the episode, you're just like, is he really going to see a ghost? And then as soon as it happens, before the actual reveal where you know that this is a ghost, I was just like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Oh shit. And so it's like you're through the name of the episode, it builds an extra layer of tension while that scene is getting to its sort of fever pitch. I just thought it was brilliant. I was like, wow, this
and
is
it's so funny.
Cool
and I love it in that pilot. And we won't spend the whole episode on this, but it is really fun to talk about. I love also in that pilot, there's a bit where the brother who's like the most messed up is running. Yeah, Luke is coming into the room to get with the camera. The context of that whole scene, I don't think you've gotten to that yet.
No, I haven't.
Is amazing.
But I love the fact that he goes, "This is not what you think."
Yeah,
and I felt like that was going to come back to the point of saying, "This is not what you think."
All of the context of everything is pretty badass.
So, anyways, that was my one little recommend because I was just like, "Oh my god, I can't believe that I haven't seen this before." And because I would have binged it in a day if I like, it's the type of thing where I would stay home and take like a sick day, or like
Yeah.
if I wasn't feeling well, I would watch that whole thing.
It's a really good binge. I think I did it over a weekend. I did like a long weekend, just watch it. It's really good. It's funny because one of the things I want to talk about as well is TV related. For half a second, I was like, "Are you going to bring up the show that I wanted to talk about?" But it's not that.
Sorry.
So we've talked about showrunners and people that have run shows a little bit on some of our episodes and some of our TV writing. And a shout out to Jeremiah Erickson, who read the Dreamwriters pilot and gave us very nice feedback on it and said that he
didn't
would
tell me that.
really want to watch the show. There are right now there's so many showrunners and so many people producing great TV, but there are a few that I really like. For me, kind of like line up 100% with what works for me.
Sure.
I think Evan Goldberg and Seth Rogen are making some really interesting television in addition to the ridiculous number of movies they're putting together. But they did Black Monday, they did Preacher, they have an upcoming docuseries called The Console Wars that's going to be all about video games. They've got something in production with NBC. They're doing a ridiculous
we
amount
talked
of
about
things.
Console Wars on the podcast previously, so yeah.
And then there's Michael Schur, of course, who did Parks and Rec, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, is doing The Good Place right now, which they're wrapping up their final season, which is sad but kind of awesome as well that they're going to end this story and tell it. The other one is a gentleman named Noah Hawley. And Noah Hawley, I first came to know about him from Fargo. He adapted not adapted. He did
Hawley, I barely even know.
he did that was a
dad joke.
I don't normally edit the podcast, but I feel bad for everyone involved in that one. I may have to.
That one was specifically for Nick Santacroce because he just loves throwing those out.
He does like those. That and back to back. But
the latter of which
back.
actually never gets old.
This is true. So Fargo was one of these things that I heard. I remember we were talking about it, and we're like, they're taking the Coen Brothers movie Fargo and making a TV series that's not a retelling. It's in the same universe kind of thing. And I was like, this sounds like a terrible idea.
Yeah, I remember.
And then I watched it, and it's, first of all, the visuals are just fucking stunning. And he did 3 seasons of Fargo, which I thought were all good in different ways. And then he took on a series called Legion, which is based on a Marvel comic about the son of Professor X and this other woman. And he's a schizophrenic with powers, and each of his identities can have different powers. And so they translated this to screen. First season was a really good slow burn set mostly in an insane asylum, basically. Second season went like crazy off the rails, interesting. But third season has essentially made his character the big bad. They've now just decided to lean in it. And the visuals in it are unlike anything I think I've ever seen on TV, including this past, not the one that did this week, but last week's episode put legitimately the first thing on TV that gave me chills the same way David Lynch does with off-putting
with Bob.
Horror. Yeah, with Bob. With it's like this universe's version of the Langoliers.
Oh, interesting.
They are time eaters, and they are designed like they're sort of these blue cat-like creatures, but their faces look like kind of masquerade faces with like a long hook nose and these huge Cheshire grins. But it's not what they look like; it's how they move.
The way you just described it made it sound like the Koopas from the Super Mario Brothers.
No, because they have the long. So what's the guy, Dr. Teeth in the Muppets? He's got like a hooked Muppet nose kind of thing, right? So, but they move in stop motion, and they're sort of blurred at all times, and they're just these jerky like things, and all they do is they make these weird laughs. It's like, and like it is. In the first scene where they're introduced, you don't know what you're looking at. You find out you're in a time loop in the episode. So like, we've got to stop this thing from happening, and it just loops right back. We've got to stop this thing from happening, and they're watching a TV screen, and each time it loops back, there's this thing getting closer and closer to the monitor they're at, and then they start looking at it, and then it reaches an arm out of the monitor, and I was like, I got like intensely uncomfortable watching it. But it is the.
So you're not saying it's a cross between The Ring and the Koopas from Super Mario Brothers.
Okay, I've done a terrible job of describing this, but no, it is. It is
Not
an amazing show to look at. The plot is crazy, but I love it. But I'm very curious to see where he goes. He's got an upcoming movie that he just directed that's coming out this year.
That's a show that has been recommended to me many times, and that I have not ever. I don't know
From a
enough about it.
cinematography standpoint, you would go crazy.
I'm sure I would. So I'm definitely. I definitely think I will take the dive at some point and get into that show.
They also had maybe my favorite, go. Yeah.
No. All I was going to say is I just remembered one thing. Because I was going to say the reason why sometimes it's difficult for me to jump into shows like that is just because they're either so sprawling and they're like difficult because I know that they have 18-hour-long episodes.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I have to get through 3 seasons of this. It's going to be very difficult for me to catch up. Just trying to rewatch Game of Thrones this past year was so daunting that we gave up basically the 4th season. I still have to do the double back and finish.
No, that's right.
up the
Legion's
rest of that
easy.
season.
It's like 3 seasons of 10.
Exactly. And so I was like, those are a little bit easier to tackle right now. And that's also the reason why I was like, I want to watch A Haunting of Hill House right now, is because it's only 1 season with a shorter episode count. Everything's directed by the same guy, by the way.
Well, and also, even if they do the second season is not the same universe.
And that's the thing. Apparently, they cast the guy who plays Luke in a completely different role.
They're
in the new
essentially
season.
doing American Horror Story. They're doing an anthology series that
Only
is
American
different.
Horror Story is fucking terrible.
Yes, I know. I agree 100% with that. But they're doing the same idea that they basically created a anthology series so they can enter it in whatever. It's weird how TV works nowadays. But
it's kind of cool too.
The last thing I wanted to say on Legion, and it kind of popped out of my head. I think
it's because I cut you off. I'm really sorry.
It's okay. The best inside joke they had also. So once they realize they're in this time loop, and you start having these scenes that are playing Groundhog Day over and over, but they're short snippets. They go to commercial break, and then they come back from the commercial break, and it's an episode of FX's The Shield with Michael Chiklis in an interrogation scene, and then it loops 3 times. So the idea is that FX has also been affected by the time loop.
That's pretty funny.
And we're getting a late 90s thing, like the people in the show are getting these moments from history retelling themselves. And I was like, that's really
novel.
Smart, fun gag.
Yeah, it's novel.
I recommend if you like weird kind of sci-fi stuff, or if you just want to look at a beautiful hour of television. Oh, and the soundtrack is insane. It's hipster music nerds like you go crazy for it. It's all just shit.
Nice.
It's deep dive stuff or weird covers. They have a lot of strange covers in it. That's kind of awesome.
Well, that's a David Lynch thing.
That's a very Lynchian. You can tell Holly very much is in love with Lynch, which is kind of fun to watch.
Nice.
And then Ben, did you want to talk a little bit? I know we had to skirt around it a little bit, but I know you want to talk a little bit about Stranger Things season 3. Or did you get out what you wanted to get out?
So I really enjoyed. Now I don't think it was the on-screen masterpiece of all masterpieces that
you don't agree with Paul.
That Paul Mamalito makes it out to be.
Paul has 2 modes. It is the best thing that's ever been, or it is the worst thing that's ever been.
Remember that I've known Paul for twice as long as I've known you. So yes, I do understand the hyperbole thing. And as a matter of fact, we got kind of into a hyperbole argument last week
at the Get Up Kids concert.
Before the Get Up Kids concert, but no, I really did enjoy the season. I think it was a really, I think tonally, they really knocked it out of the park. Now there are lots of details. I know that you have the major qualms with all of the stuff with the sexism and the kind of workplace harassment, which is fair.
It was fine, but that was my only real issue with it.
Well, and I understand that what they were going to is also sort of an homage to a lot of sort of the 80s stuff that they did, but ultimately a lot of this stuff in this giant implausible underground layer kind of looked like Flash Gordon to me, but that's okay too. I mean, it's, it is what it is. Like I said,
you mean the very clearly a set underground set piece?
a place that has no bearing in real reality and never has anything that's ever looked like that ever. Yes. And not to mention the implausibility of it being there in the first place.
Yes.
But we're not going to get into all of that because tonally, what we're there for is for some of the fun little thrills and for the synergy between the cast and especially the kids.
Yeah.
And that's super, super 100% just dripping with like 80s nostalgia and fun. And the cast all fucking nails it.
Well, and they finally gave Winona Ryder a more fun, even though there are times where it gets serious, but at least she was able to open up. And same as Will, they're not mired in this like overwrought melodramatic stuff. They get to explore an adventure.
Poor
a little
Will
bit.
for the first 2 seasons was just like writhing around in pain half the time in one way or another. And so in the 3rd season, he's basically just the guy who's just like, I want to play D&D.
I think it was Josh Burgess, and I hadn't even started the series at this point, but he had just put on his on Facebook something like, no spoilers, but the way those kids treated Will after he came out with that baller D&D opening and would being a good dungeon master, nobody deserves that.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, and Hopper is just fantastic as kind of always, and of course Brett Gelman showing up, always making him look like the most disgusting human being on the planet. And I always feel like he's probably not the asshole that he plays on so many TV series at times, but he's the one that plays Murray, the long he's somebody that I've been following on TV shows for a long time. He always plays just like
smarmy characters,
just gross characters. Now he's like growing the hair out. It's just worse.
But Murray's. I mean, I like Murray.
Murray was much better this season, but he's still kind of he was much better this season with Smirnoff, which is also a great nickname in the show. Yeah, I liked it. Like I said, I had the issue with the one plot line, just the one overwrought scene, but other than that, it was fun. And like we've said before, the monster design is as good as anything I've seen on TV and in a lot of movies. It was just inventive and gross and
it was kind of it's what The Thing remake should have done, which is kind of like CGI aided, like really weird goopy effects, and as opposed to just doing
those rats exploding and those people exploding are just God.
Yeah, it was gross. It was great. It was well
really
done.
Gross.
It was well done. Spoiler alert: people and rats explode.
Listen, if you go into an episode of Stranger Things thinking people or rats aren't going to explode, you're in for a bad time. Okay, should always expect that in that show.
You're going to have a bad time.
That's right. So on to our topic at hand. We, I believe it was on our Wasted Talent episode that aired a couple episodes ago. We were discussing a specific director, a man named Richard Linklater, out of Austin, from Austin, I believe Austin born?
No, West Texas. West Central Texas born, Austin resident. Still Austin resident, but he went to UT of Austin.
Okay. A director most of you may not know by name, but you've seen at least probably 3 of his movies. One of them you quote.
You could be a complete layman, and I think that you've seen almost 10 of his movies.
10?
Yeah, I would think so.
I don't know about that.
I could name them.
Okay, what are the 10 movies? We'll get to that thing. But this is a filmmaker. So, where did he first get on your radar, Ben?
Really, really interesting story. I remember, and I think that you were probably a little bit too old for this in high school, Matt, and getting into college, is because there was this huge argument I remember between people in middle school of what was the better movie, Empire Records or Dazed and Confused.
Wow.
Now, both movies have a very sort of similar construct in that they take place in real time. Over the course of one day or one evening, basically. They involve a lot of different characters, basically. They both have relatively sort of stylized dialogue. The major difference being that Empire Records takes place in the 90s, with it being populated mostly by indie music in the 90s. Indie and pop and rock and stuff like that, with some throwbacks, too. There's some like Dire Straits and stuff like that in there as well. Whereas Dazed and Confused I think is supposed to take place in 1976. And so it's a lot of, nostalgia. And I was very, very firmly Team Empire Records.
Really?
At that age, yeah. I thought Empire Records, in sort of its overt quirk, factor really like sold to me as a 13-year-old.
Okay.
Or 14-year-old or whatever it was when I saw that movie. I was probably 13 or 14. I really, really liked Empire Records, and I actually still do. It's a movie that holds up way better than I expected it to, which I saw like 2 or 3 years ago. Did not expect for it to hold up at all, and we just randomly ended up watching it on CMT at like 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, and I ended up watching it almost all the way through, and I was just like, you know what? It actually holds up pretty well. However, so I remember this. All I knew is that I had rented Slacker at one point, which I actually found, which I know you didn't like, which I found casually amusing. It didn't bore me. It didn't amaze me or anything.
I never even finished it.
It was way later that I found out it was this. I had no idea that the Dazed and Confused guy was the same guy. I probably watched him around the same time.
Yeah.
So I had no idea that Slacker and Dazed and Confused were written by the same guy. And I went along. And I remember that Daniel Pickett, actually, the Newton Boys was his favorite movie of that year.
That does not surprise me in the slightest.
No, he loved the Newton Boys.
This is the least surprising thing you've ever said about Daniel Pickett.
So I remember, this is a friend of mine from high school, I remember us having a sleepover, and this is when I'm in high school at this point, it's like 98, us watching the Newton Boys. No idea. Still not correlating the fact that all of these guys are together. It wasn't until I was at the Fort Lauderdale Film Festival when I was a freshman at FSU Film, where we took a trip down, and I was one of 3 freshmen on the entire trip. It was mostly for upperclassmen. And it was basically just because I was working in I was volunteering at the film school library. I was one of the few people that was actually always at the film school, which you didn't have to be as a freshman. You were supposed to be doing all of your other stuff, but I would just go and hang out there. I would hang out with all the other upperclassmen. It was like, I want to be cool. Hire me to do. I was like, let me do the music on your movie.
Yeah.
I'm a musician. I'll act in any of your movies. So I acted in some movies. I did some music for a few people's movies. It actually ended up being really kind of great because I met some upperclassmen.
Ben, this is a story about Richard Linklater,
Hold
not
on.
Ben Wilson. Okay, just one.
Hold on. So I was at the Fort Lauderdale Film Festival, and the opening night movie was Waking Life.
Oh, wow.
And so I wouldn't say I watched Waking Life. I experienced Waking Life. It's a love-hate movie if you want to call it a movie. But immediately, unfortunately, and actually
that's a great quote by the way for the front cover of that re-release.
Exactly. Linklater was originally supposed to be there to present it and then was not. Which I thought was which it wouldn't have mattered at all to me in retrospect.
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh shit, it would have been amazing to be just in a theater that holds 200 people. It's not this huge film festival or whatever, and Linklater tells why he made the movie and that type of stuff, which is what we got to hear from Quaron, which is what we got to hear from a couple of other.
Is that for a Little Princess, or what was he doing?
Itu Mama.
Oh wow! Oh fuck, that's right, 2001, right?
2001.
Yeah. Jeez Louise.
So. Yeah, it was a really interesting experience because I remember almost feeling motion sick walking out of that movie, and I immediately said, I have to watch everything this guy has ever done. I immediately I was just like, what have I missed? And so I that's when I went back into the dive, and that's when I rewatched Dazed and Confused, and I was like, I can't compare them nowadays because I still have the nostalgia thing in my brain where it tells me that Empire Records is the more fun movie to watch, but it's obvious that Dazed and Confused is the better film.
Yeah.
There's no question there. But yeah, I rewatched Slacker. I went back and rewatched the Newton Boys. I went back and watched Suburbia for the first time.
Yeah. So it's funny.
What about you?
Very, very similar, other than the film school and the festival stuff. But I think... I'm trying to think of the first thing I saw. I think I'd probably seen parts of Dazed and Confused maybe my freshman year at OSU, but I never really watched it. It was kind of funny for context as well, based on our age differences. So a lot of these movies, you're looking at Dazed and Confused as 93, Empire Records was 95, somewhere in there. A lot of these movies were coming out when I was in high school. I was a freshman for Dazed and Confused, but it was like something a freshman in high school is not going to go see, and then it didn't seem to catch on video for another 7 year. It seemed like it took. Because I didn't remember it being
Oh, I remember.
At least in my group, it wasn't like a big high school thing.
No, it was
we
before,
didn't talk about that movie.
Before I was in high school, middle schoolers would argue over what was the better movie.
And that's what's so weird, because like the movies that we were talking about when we were in high school, it was a lot of Pulp Fiction. It was Swingers. I mean, Swingers was huge. I remember that movie just being like that was the arty, like cool indie thing that we were all talking. Empire Records was one of those. I remember it and Mallrats came out, I think, like opposite one another.
Might have
at the theater. And they just, to me, I would just look at the poster, and they both of them, mostly misrepresented a little bit. They just looked like 90s pretty glossy, like stupid comedies. Like
with Empire Records, you're absolutely right. That's what it is. It just happens to be quirky enough that it makes itself endearing.
Yeah, and I've never actually seen Empire Records.
Oh, interesting.
At least not all the way through. I've watched. I've definitely caught parts.
It's
of
not
it.
one of those things I would go out of your way to watch by any stretch of the imagination. But it's also, like I said, it's not bad, and it ended up aging pretty well.
Well, and so what happened with me is, I kind of missed a lot of those movies. The Newton Boys I was aware of, but I've still not seen the Newton Boys, which I will have to rectify after this podcast.
Interesting.
But I think so. I had left OSU and I was back down here for like a semester before I went up to UF. And that's when I was really getting into Kevin Smith. I had just started to get it. I had just seen Chasing Amy up at OSU, and I was super excited. And I was watching Clerks, and I was reading every article I could get. And then my brother we were both at home at like this kind of crossover time. And I used to steal, my brother would rent movies from Blockbuster. And then when he would go to work in the day, I'd go in his room and I'd steal whatever he rented from Blockbuster and watch it. And that's how I saw lots of good shit Going All the Way. Like I saw all these like indie movies that he was renting, because I didn't have any I didn't know enough. I didn't even know where to go looking for these things. So
Spanking
one of them,
the Monkey.
Yeah, Spanking the Monkey, and both Jeremy Davies in those movies. I mean, there's some amazing indie stuff going on from 98 to 2001. Just like a lot of teen centric kind of shit.
And a lot of people would call it kind of you're talking about the indie renaissance right there, which is where that's where indies became these huge marketable items there from like the 97 to 2000
after
period.
Pulp Fiction. It was that was I think the one for me. I think that was
even Pulp Fiction had clout. Like I feel like it was 97, 98, where some of these films that cost nothing to make and were came out of nowhere and would be indie darlings at like Sundance.
And that part of how I came to when I actually how I got to know his name. I think the first one I saw was Suburbia. My brother had rented Suburbia. Okay. I found out that it was based on a play, so I bought the script to the play. I was obsessed. I thought it was so great, and Suburbia is written. Well, I'll actually talk about it. But I saw that one. Didn't know who directed it. I wasn't paying attention to who the directors were in a lot of these things.
Right.
Then I was hanging out with my friends, and someone brought up Dazed and Confused, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds good. I'm gonna go watch." Because I was talking about Kevin Smith stuff, and they're like, "Oh, Ben Affleck was in Dazed and Confused, and there's all these other people." I'm like, shit, I got to get that movie. So a lot of things I went to were like, oh, this actor's in it. I'm going to go follow that actor down the rabbit hole and go through watch these things. So I saw Dazed and Confused, still not knowing a director. Then I read the book by Kevin Smith, Spike, Mike, Slackers, and Dykes, which is it's the history of independent filmmaking.
Yep.
And Slackers was on that. So I'm like, I've been devouring all of this this like pop culture indie stuff. So I get to Slacker and I put it on. I'm so excited, and I couldn't get through it. And I was like, Slacker became my baseline of like a sour beer. Like I was okay with Clerks is like a wild farmhouse ale or like a saison, and then you get to Slacker. And I'm like, no, that's full sour. It's not right. There's not enough there for me. Speed. But I'm like, then I started to look up who this director is, and I go, oh shit, he directed that movie I liked, Suburbia, and he directed that movie I liked, Dazed and Confused. Then it's Waking Life, and then it starts to kind of open up, and then School of Rock was where I really was just like, okay, I'm gonna go watch everything that this guy does just in general, because I like the way he handles characters and how the comedy kind of flows in some of the stuff he does. And that's what I liked about it. And I hadn't seen any of the before series at that point.
And so to give a little background, and there's one of the reasons why we're talking about, obviously we have a love for Richard Linklater, who is I think the reason why we wanted to bring him up and single him out on an episode is because he's a unique voice that sort of managed to keep that voice as a very strange niche throughout the course of the years, over the course of a filmography that spans 29 total films at this point. including the upcoming films that he has coming up, without really being noticed the way that, a Tarantino is, or the way that a, Spielberg is, or any big name, or if you get into some of the independent film, I mean, they're these huge names sort of in independent film, or like a Cuarón or somebody like that.
He's not a darling of any of the circuits necessarily.
And I felt like his moment to become a darling happened a couple of years ago, and it came and went like a swift tide.
He got a Best Director Golden Globe.
It's true. But,
for Boyhood.
Yes, well, that's the movie I was referring to, where he had, it was, for a moment, he was considered like, oh, yes, he's this, brilliant auteur.
I think his only Oscar nomination was for that, too.
I think so. And I actually, one of the things I did to prepare myself for the podcast is I was interested in seeing sort of perspective, because I've listened to a lot of Richard Linklater lectures and notes and questions. He's great about talking with other directors and doing roundtables, and there's tons of content out there. He's a really super interesting guy. And I was interested in seeing what was the oldest stuff I could find. And so I found these great interviews.
Oh, nice.
One from 1991, right after Slacker had come out, and he was just like, and this is kind of what I wanted to bring as sort of his overall focus. Well, one of the reasons why I think that he is the way that he is he was just like, I don't really think of filmmaking as I don't know if this is going to be a job or a career. I don't really know. He's like, all I just know is you kind of have to have an attention to detail, and you kind of have to put your ego aside. And you're just there to service the actor and the story. And then I listened to him talking about the Newton Boys 6 years later, and he's obviously a mature dude who has now made 4, relatively higher budgeted major motion pictures, even though they're still indie films, but you still have millions of dollars. Newton Boys is like a $25 million film. And he was essentially the same guy. And nothing had really changed with him. All he had was a little bit more perspective. And the way he was talking about actors is he was just when he was like, oh, well, what are the ways that you cast? And he was just like, well, honestly, I'm more interested in the actor as the person. I talk with an actor as a person, and I kind of have to then kind of do these mental. I'm paraphrasing here. He's like, I have to do this kind of mental idea of well, where would he fit in this narrative? And then it's just he's like, but then after the fact, he's like, oh, Newton Boys is I think Skeet Ulrich could have played Ethan Hawke's role. Ethan Hawke could have played Matthew McConaughey's role. Matthew McConaughey could have played Dwight Yoakam's role. It could have all been interchangeable. He's like, I'm more interested in them in actors. They're talented people.
Sure. Well, and it's obvious that he's casting talent, because I cannot think of 4 human beings that look less related. I don't think I could actively put together 4 people.
Vincent
that
D'Onofrio, Skeet Ulrich. Yeah.
They're very but no, I think it's interesting that his filmography is really all over the place. I cannot really.
But yes, it has a certain synergy. It has a synergy.
Well, I think it's what you said. It's character. It's how he views characters and their arcs and their stories and how he makes them work together. And what's kind of fun also is that he made a name for himself very much doing kind of these dealing with these giant casts, yet he also has 7 or 8 movies that are 3 people, or they're these very small, exactly, these small, very intimate things, and he's able to translate doing the ensemble to just the few people really, really well. And I think that for me, that's what I wasn't responding necessarily to the writing of a lot of stuff. Because sometimes the writing it depended on what it was. It was of the time period, but I like. Not that it's bad writing in any way at all. I'm not saying that. But I just responded more to how I always felt these people hanging out together made sense. I understand how and why these people got together, and their characters make sense to me.
And more so, and this is not a knock on a guy like Kevin Smith.
Yeah.
Who I love. I love Kevin Smith, not nearly to the level that Matt does, but I do love Kevin Smith. I love Kevin Smith as a person so much. But I love his movies too. The difference between, there's a stylization that happens within the characters of a Kevin Smith movie where you have to put yourself into the View Askew universe, and you have to understand this is the way people communicate within this sort of context and within this universe. Whereas a Linklater film feels like I walked around the corner and stumbled into a couple of my friends having a conversation. And it feels organic. And I think that's the way he's always approached his filmmaking, and that's the way he comes across in interviews. And I think that's the way he's approached his career. And the reason why he's had an enduring career through multiple genres and through is because actors love him. I mean, they absolutely adore him. I mean, actors just want to work with him as much as they possibly can, especially Texan actors. He's very, very good to Texas.
Yes.
By the way, he shoots all of his movies in Texas. He lives in Austin still, and he's a huge advocate for the Texas film industry. Him and Robert Rodriguez are really good friends. They've even though they've never worked together, but like Rodriguez and him they couldn't be on further opposite ends of the spectrum. Robert Rodriguez of Desperado, El Mariachi, Spy Kids, many other pulpy films.
No, and I think you make a perfect point about how that, because I really love that quote that you said from him, because that's the polar opposite of how Kevin Smith casts a movie by who can say my dialogue the way I want my dialogue to sound, which is like me. And I just have 5 different versions of me, and then there's some female versions of me, and it's great. I'm not saying I don't like it,
right?
But it's not the same as watching people that feel like they belong together. So Ben and I each picked 3 movies for us to kind of focus on for this. Why don't you start off with yours, Ben?
So I will start off with the one that I mentioned first, which is the one that took me to a new place, and that's Waking Life. Now, Waking Life, for those who have not seen it, and I'm not surprised if you haven't, because it's not one of his more mainstream or popular or big movies.
That's the one that's the prequel to Scanner Darkly, right?
Oh, God.
I used to, by the way, sort of get confused by the two of those.
So, Waking Life was a film that was shot in like 2.5 weeks on digital camera. Starring actually the main guy, if there is a main guy in Dazed and Confused, the youngest of the kids.
Yeah.
It's a slightly older version of that, apparently that same character, but in a modern context. It's a very strange sort of nebulous thing. Really what happened was Linklater read a book and then read a bunch of articles about lucid dreaming and the idea of being self-conscious within the course of a dream and being able to guide that dream and understand sort of where you can go and what you can learn sort of from your own subconscious. And he basically took that and made a movie that is a dream, which there are lots of new wave filmmakers that made movies that are dreams, or you could even go back into the 30s with like, Shian Andalou or whatever. But the construct is you understand that there's a dream occurring here. And what they did was they shot the movie on digital, and then they edited the movie within a course of a couple weeks. Like the entire production of this movie took place in 5 or 6 weeks.
That's crazy.
Then they spent 16 or 17 months with artists hand painting over every frame. So it's painted. It's a painted movie. So it looks animated, but there are different artists doing different portions of the movie. The foreground and background constantly shift and change like some sort of weird surrealist painting. It like I said, it literally gave me a sense of motion sickness when I saw it on the big screen.
It almost has a squiggle vision-ish feel to the way it moves.
It's very strange, yes.
Yeah.
Because the idea is that the artist could manipulate the backgrounds and could move things the way they want to, because there are some portions that feel almost entirely animated, and there's some that feel more almost photorealistic, where it's just the color brush, like the watercolor over this. And all it is this character basically going from person to person to real personality, getting lectured on the human psyche and the concept of dreaming. And you think for about half of its runtime, for about 45 minutes, you're like, is this it? It's just a TED Talk. I mean, it's just you're going to a bunch of different TED Talks, and it's this one guy, but they're framed in the form of this conversation.
Just sort of Slacker.
It's very
Slacker-esque.
It's very Slacker-esque. But then you realize about halfway or 2/3 of the way through that this character is like, it starts communicating with people. He's like, I can't get out of here. I just keep going and having these random conversations with random people. I don't understand what's going on. like, how do I get out? And at one point he has a conversation with Richard Linklater himself, who then tells him a story and tells him to wake up. But it's this very, but ultimately it has an opening and a close. It has this kind of preface and a coda that basically bring this sort of surrealist moment of like, what is a sense of self? What is your sense of identity? And I just remember crying my eyes out the first time I saw it, because you through the movie you're being kind of like sort of objectively fun and like enlightened, like you're learning a lot about sort of these different perspectives and but ultimately all it's about is that it's about this individual's journey through sort of his own, and I think kind of what you're realizing is he's probably dead or dying.
Yeah.
And he's kind of spoiler alert, but this is I think it's not a spoiler because it's such an entirely objective movie.
Yeah,
and it has such a beautiful closing moment, and it's done. The music is done by this fantastic sextet of string players from Texas. They were all performers at Texas UT at Austin. So, anyways, it's a fantastic film. It's not your usual cup of tea. It is definitely something that's going to require your attention and detail and immersion into and an understanding that you're not going to watch a normal narrative, which I feel is the same way that you would watch it. It happened if you watch Slacker.
Sure.
You have to understand that this movie is going to go off the rails.
Yeah. And it's funny, and it's funny. I need to go back and watch Slacker. I mean, when I was just getting into that stuff.
Like I
might like it better now.
I almost feel like you would think of it now. Like I thought of it when I was a kid, which I was just like, this is kind of funny. Like, because I was so off the wall for me. I just kind of just thought it was kind of like I was just like, okay.
All I remember was that, like, it just felt like someone walking along with someone with a video camera, and there was nothing happening, and I was just like, I don't like this.
Right.
But
yeah.
I probably gave it 25, 30 minutes and I turned it off. But so yeah, that's a great one. And I think I wound up seeing that one probably when I got back from from Gainesville. I can't remember when I saw Waking Life, but I came to it a little bit later. But I remember just being like, the visual was so interesting to me, and that whole concept and the idea that it was painted. I remember that was a huge thing reading about the movie. It was like,
well, it took forever to do it.
Yeah, they've hand painted this movie. Which you could do nowadays, like.
Well, you could, but
it wouldn't be the way
it was literally hand
painted.
painted.
Yeah. So the one I want to talk about first on mine was my first introduction to Linklater, not knowing it, was Suburbia. And Suburbia is based on a play by Eric Bogosian, who did talk radio. He's also acted in such hits as Under Siege 2.
No, nice.
And I'm sorry, Under Siege 3, where it's on a train.
Oh, no, wait, that's Under Siege 2.
Oh, that is Under Siege. Okay, he's the bad guy in Under Siege 2.
Confusing our Under Sieges.
I'm so sorry. I'm so embarrassed. We're just supposed to be professionals. But Suburbia was
Steven Seagal kicks down the door. He'd be like, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
Well, Suburbia was also when I was still like heavily mired in theater, but I was also really into Kevin Smith. Suburbia was perfect. It was a play written somewhat in a not the Kevin Smith style. It was much more. It was a bunch of kids hanging outside of a 7-Eleven who are having these lofty conversations, but they don't know shit. Like, it's very clear, like, that it's satire as you get through it, that they're spouting things. Giovanni Ribisi, Nicky Katt, Steve Zahn, who, that was my first introduction to Steve Zahn. I was obsessed. He's so good in it. Parker Posey was the biggest name in it. It was a dirt cheap movie to shoot. Were you gonna say something?
Well, I was gonna say Parker Posey was also in Dazed and Confused, wasn't she?
She was. Yeah, she's I mean, she was kind of the indie queen during that. That was like her height of her reign, where you could get her in a movie and she could actually help open things and get them on festival circuits. Nice. But yeah, it's a great play. I think they did a revival of it. I want to say like 10 years ago with Kieran Culkin in the Steve Zahn role, which I always thought would be really interesting to watch. But yeah, it's these kids outside of 7-Eleven. The general there's not much of a plot, but the little bit of plot there is that they're high school. They're kind of do-nothings. One of them's was a football star in high school, and he went off to fight for a little bit and got hurt, and how he's back on like a pension and just drinks himself all the time. The other is this like kid that's like going through community college, but he's got all of these lofty philosophical goals. And then their friend from high school has gone off to become a rock star. And he's coming back into town for one night and wants to hang with the old gang and see what's going to go on. It's basically how this uproots a
Right.
lot of their stuff. It's completely dialogue driven. I mean, when you have something that's based on a play where you're sat outside of a convenience store, it's hard not to draw the conclusion, the parallels to Kevin Smith, because it really much just takes place in like 2 or 3 locations.
Right.
But I loved what he does with the characters, and there are kind of 2 heavy-ish reveals, 2 or 3 heavy-ish reveals as the veneer starts to strip away from it. But I was really impressed with how even in this movie, which is the most Kevin Smith-ish of his films, it still feels more like, yes, these are all people kind of waiting for their turn to talk, but they make sense for it, because this guy has got this opinion, and she's like the budding feminist, and this guy is the anti-feminist. Like, everyone sort of makes sense in their interactions.
It feels
on
more
it.
organic than
Yes.
it does. Yeah.
And really, I will always owe this movie to just introducing me to the great Steve Zahn. Like I said, I thought Steve Zahn was like the funniest guy, and I did pull one Buff clip, just very quick one.
Nice.
It's Buff talking about how he was delivering pizzas and got to bang this woman.
So I carry the pie out to her car. We smoke a J. She blows me. We eat the pizza. I chase her with the beer. Smoke, babe, slice, brew. All 4 bases. Fucking home run, man.
Buff, your ability to fantasize is only exceeded by your ability to lie.
It's also just an amazing line, by the way. But yeah, I wanted to play Buff so bad. I still have that script sitting on my bookshelf. I've always wanted to direct it.
It's never too late,
It's
Matt.
never too late to play a 40-year-old Buff.
I think the context would be a lot different now.
Well, and actually this is really funny. So one of my high school friends, a guy named Vince, which my other friends listening to this will know, Vince was auditioning for I think Pathfinder Awards and for colleges for theater. So I actually helped him prepare his monologue, which was Giovanni Ribisi's monologue in this, where he gets naked. And I was like,
Okay.
Listen, dude, I think if you want to get into a college, I think you go for it. I think you play the scene. I think you strip down and you go balls to the wall for it. He did not, of course, do that, but I still to this day think that there's no way they can turn you down if you commit. In a theater for a bunch of theater people,
Or they
eat that shit up.
Or they take you. Yeah, I was about to say, or they take you out.
They could. This was 2001. It was a simpler time back then.
It was true.
Maybe it was 99, 98. But yeah, I love the movie. I think it's great. I highly recommend go check it out.
Nice.
Yeah, succinct.
Yeah. Well,
efficient.
So I'm going to talk about the second movie, which originally was going to, I think I'd talk about the Newton Boys, but which is a great historical, fun movie. Has probably the least amount of character, from a Linklater standpoint,
Sure.
of character kind of integrated into it. So I decided I would talk briefly about Boyhood.
Okay. I was surprised that was not on your list.
Well, just because Boyhood, which was my favorite movie of 2016 when it was released, is a movie, for those who don't know, that was shot. That was 2014?
2014.
Oh, it was 2016.
2014. 2016 was Everybody Gets Some.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Time flies.
Yeah.
Anyways, everybody wants some, not everybody gets some. I was like, something's wrong with that. That's Matt's favorite version of the movie.
It's
everybody gets some.
No, everybody gets some. Just get some, okay, everybody?
Everybody gets some.
Son of a bitch. I did it to myself again.
I had to call you on it, though. I mean, everybody gets some. I think I remember seeing that movie in my sophomore year and Luke's random porn trove.
I love that
everybody gets some.
I love that you stumbled onto like an ideology of like, everybody wants some, not everybody gets some. Confucius say.
Oh, anyways. No, so Boyhood was filmed over the course of about 12 or 13 years, where they used the same actors, starting with a boy who was 5 or 6 years old, and continued to film every 3 or 4 years for a couple of weeks at a time, including Linklater's own daughter, Lorelai. as his sister. And it ultimately it came together as this sort of I feel like what people expected from that movie was completely different from what we got.
I would say my one major comment on that movie is how pretentious does that movie sound in anybody else's hands other than Richard Linklater? Like it sound like the if you pitch me that idea, I'm gonna go, that's great. Like because I'm expecting something just too artsy for its own. Like I'm expecting something really like precious versus what he did with it. I felt was just emotional and real.
It was just organic, and I think a lot of people complained. They were like, "Well, nothing happens in the movie." I was like, "No, you're watching a kid grow up."
Yeah.
And that in and of itself is enough. I mean that and watching all these other characters and watching the Patricia Arquette character kind of grow older and mature, and the Ethan Hawke character grow older and mature, which will happen in another series in a minute. But being able to watch all these individuals kind of become the people that they are within the context of a narrative, but organically feeling that as they age it is really special, and it's super interesting that people don't continue, I think, to harp on how wonderful and brilliant it actually was, that it worked. Now, it was nominated for Best Picture. It was nominated for a ton of awards. But like I said, people kind of said, oh, yeah, it's that movie that Richard Linklater did over the course of 13 years. Yay. And it was released, and then it came out, and then it passed, and then nobody went and saw his next movies.
Well, and it's funny because, I think also how his next movies were released had a little bit to do with it as well.
It's true.
But yeah, I think with Boyhood, because there's a danger in it that in theory you're like, okay, I'm gonna write this script and we're gonna visit 4 really important moments in this kid's life. These are gonna be the most seminal, important things that have happened to him that form who he is. And it's not that. It's their moments, and they're not trivial, but it's not like some catastrophic event each time in his life.
Somebody die in a car crash or something along those lines.
And for me, I remember getting emotional just on the transitions. Not that there's anything done fancy with the transitions. You're literally just like, you're ending a moment and you come back and this kid is
bigger.
Like a completely different little human being as he's growing up. And every time you're like, fuck. Like, and if you want to make any kind of artistic thing for it, it's
Tom Hanks is bigger.
Somebody shouted out "bigger," by the way, in my friends group the other day that thought that was really funny. So I think it might have been Casey, but yeah, I think it's kind of cool that it wasn't that, and it was just you keep coming back, and it's essentially what I'm sure parents feel. I mean, I hear from all the time is like, you can't believe how fast they're growing up. You're literally watching that on a thing where it's nothing crazy's happened. It's happened. It's there. They're older. They're bigger, and there's no stopping it. It's kind of crazy.
No, yeah, I thought it's a brilliant concept and really well executed because it does not lean into heavy moments, because it leans on the minutia. And the character work and the way that the kid's interacting with his parents and the circumstances that his parents are in, which are always not the highlight of everything. They're more kind of just there in the background. It's a brilliant concept, and I'm happy that it was done. But I'm most especially happy it was done by Richard Linklater, because I don't think it would have worked for pretty much anybody else.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I'm gonna go mine in order of when they were released. So we had Suburbia, which is 96. Now we're gonna go way fast forward, and technically this movie was made in 2008 and released. They opened it at Cannes, and then it finally got distribution for they put it out just for Oscar season in 2009 in December, but it really didn't actually hit anywhere mainstream until the very beginning of 2010, which is why I remember hearing about it for a long time, and then I didn't actually see it until probably 2010 or 2011, which is 3 fucking years after it was actually made. It's crazy. But it's a movie called Me and Orson Welles. It stars the dreamy Zac Efron, one of Nick's favorite actors. I'm so upset Nick's not on the podcast to talk about.
And the dreamy Claire Danes.
And the dreamy Claire Danes. But it was definitely the first movie I sat up and said, oh, Zac Efron actually can act, and he has a pretty good. It is a perfect role for him. It's literally no perfect written for somebody like him, but it's a great story. It's 1937. Zac Efron's a high school kid that's going to New York with his class to look at the theater district. He wanders into the Mercury Theater where the great Orson Welles has a residency directing a production of Julius Caesar. Through a couple of kind of finagling his way in, he winds himself up in this production. He's still this high school kid, which you kind of forget as you're watching the movie. Right. And what I love that Linklater does is what he does with the very end of the film. But essentially, he gets cast in this movie, and Welles takes a liking to him
in a play.
In a play, and he takes a liking to Welles, and they kind of forge this friendship. The guy playing Orson Welles, Christian McKay, British actor, does maybe the most note perfect impersonation / performance. Like, it's crazy. Are you giving me a look like you don't agree, or are you giving me a look like you agree?
So I don't agree.
Oh no. No.
I feel like he does Orson Welles in The Third Man well. He does an impression of Orson Welles in The Third Man. I don't think he does an impression of Orson Welles as Orson Welles necessarily. Which
see, that's what I felt different about that movie a little bit.
I'm not going to derail the conversation completely, but I have a really funny aside to put into this. For those who don't know, so Christian McKay, who was cast, it was an unknown.
Yeah, first movie.
It was first. Yeah, I think it's been TV or something like that before.
He did 2 TV movies, and he had done a play. He done a show as Orson Welles. He was kind of like known for his Orson Welles impersonation,
right? So
that Ben Wilson doesn't think is good enough.
No. He does the slick Orson Welles voice pretty well, or whatever. The shadow voice.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you. Do you want to hear a little? You want to hear a little of his Orson Welles?
Sure, of course.
I'm afraid, Mr. Wells, we're going to have to ask your friend.
Call me Orson.
I'm afraid we're going to have to ask your friend to wait out here during the recording. Mr. Ainley is very strict.
He's my biographer. I've already cleared it with Joe. Your name is?
Lorelei Lathrop.
That may very well be the most musically perfect name I've ever heard. Something so graceful in the way you move, too. You're a dancer, aren't you?
I studied ballet.
You've seen Jack Holland and June Hart at the Ritz-Carlton.
No.
My God, if you love dance, you must see them. Will you let me take you tonight?
So, the reason why I bring it up is because whenever I watch that movie, I always think back to Angus McFadden and his performance in The Cradle Will Rock, which is a much more sort of like, it's much less of an impersonation of Welles, but more, I feel like he captures the character of his insanity a little bit better, where he's like where at one point he's just like, this is what we need her, she's raw, she's whatever, and then later he's like, oh, why did we cast her, she's terrible, so his accent's bad, but I felt like Welles, like that was more of Welles the performer, and I understand, like in the context of the movie, often he's performing for the people around him.
And I don't feel there's actually at the point we are at with Welles in this, where he's gone through the film things. Everyone's sure this play is going to flop. There's this bad feeling about it. People are kind of over the Welles shtick, but he's still holding on to it. And I think there are a couple of moments where he slightly lets it down, but I think part of the direction in that is that, no, he was a consummate performer / con man in an extent. And the end of this movie is sort of where I think that pays off. Is that
of course.
Even in the moments where you're supposed to be hearing what you think is the real Welles, where he's having this heart-to-heart with it. And I'm asking you, Ben, professional opinion. If I talk about the end of this movie, does it really spoil the movie, or
no.
should? Okay, so this young actor, who turns out, by the way, is not a very good actor.
Yeah, he's pretty bad.
He winds up very enmeshed in this production. He becomes friends with a lot of the people in the cast and with the producer on it. And they get to a point where Orson Welles wants to fire him, but they're opening very soon. And Welles finally sits him down and goes, "Look, we're gonna work this out. I need to keep you on. I think you're important." And he gives him this very heartfelt speech, right? And then they open, and as soon as they finish their opening night, Welles fires him. And he's like, I just needed you for the opening night. It was all bullshit. Everything I told you about how great you are and all stuff, it's bullshit. This is how this business works. And the kid watches the girl that he's been trying to have this relationship with. She's now like pimping herself out to get into a David O. Selznick movie. And he winds up by the end of the movie back in high school reciting a piece of a play in his high school class and getting laughed at by his like peers.
Yeah.
It's a really sobering, kind of amazing ending for it. But I love that the glimmer of hope on it is he's been having this flirtation with this girl he meets at a record store, and her career is taking off. She's about to write this big piece for I think the New York Times. And she's like, so the last scene in the movie is after he's had this like terrible day at school. She's like, well, let's go out to dinner and celebrate my new job placement. Just get this article that's going to break on there. I love it from a backstage theater standpoint. I also have to give a huge shout out to Eddie Marsan doing a John Houseman impersonation. I was a big fan of the TV show Silver Spoons. John Houseman played the grandfather on, but he's known from The Paper Chase and other things. But I love a good character actor impersonation. Eddie Marsan kills it.
I have a quick note.
Yes.
So one of the funniest things I've read is because when I was about to make the comparison, because I remembered Christian McKay's name because it was one of his first roles or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh God, what was the guy's name that played him in Cradle Will Rock? I was like, he was Robert the Bruce in Braveheart. Look it up. It's Angus McFadden.
Yeah.
So
that's what you said.
No, I know.
Okay.
I didn't remember this earlier. No, this is something I looked up earlier today when I was doing a little bit of cursory research. I'm sorry if I didn't clarify that.
No.
No, but what I said, so I went and I looked really quickly, and I was like, I accidentally double-clicked, and I ended up on Angus McFadden's IMDb biography. So I was reading through this long biography. I was just like, well, I'm here. I might as well read it.
Yeah. I'm talking, so Ben's just catching up on some light reading during the podcast. I was like, I just read War and Peace.
No.
Have you seen this thing? It's great.
I'm talking about this all happened earlier.
I'm kidding.
This happened this morning.
I'm kidding.
This happened this morning. But I found something that made me laugh so hard is because I realized on IMDb, user contributors can put forth and can write people's biographies. If nobody else
they should.
is contributing, it's basically like it's like a Wikipedia.
Yeah.
And so it goes through Angus McFadden's entire filmography and career and all of these like accolades he's gotten or whatever. And then it gets to the last line after it says, the last things he was in. It says, yes, Angus McFadden. Hopefully, he continues to make more films, and one of these days, he will win a hard-earned and long-deserving award for his troubles and successes.
Wow.
I was just like, on IMDb, that's in his biography.
That's heavy. That's super heavy.
And so I'm like, is this somebody who's just really obsessed with Angus McFadden, or is this Angus McFadden pissed off, being like...
Do you think they wrote that before or after We Bought a Zoo? I'm thinking before.
It's after, because they mentioned We Bought a Zoo in the context of that.
Oh, well, they were sorely mistaken if they thought I was going to follow that.
I was just like, I've never read that in a biography. I was just like, oh, hopefully they win an award for all of their suffering.
You'll catch some ones where you're like, oh, that's awfully, there's some color on that one that I did not expect. All right, so Ben, let's now remember that we have discussed these a little bit on the show a few times before.
I'll go very quickly.
But let's do the let's talk about the Before series.
So the Before series is 3 films. It's Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, and Before Midnight, all starring Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy as Jesse and Celine. They meet on a train in the first movie and have a romantic evening where they talk about their dreams and thoughts and the way that they perceive the world. The sequel, and the reason why I can get away with this being one film is because it essentially is one film.
Sure.
It's 3 acts of the same film. They all take place in relatively real time. The second film takes place 9 years later, where Ethan Hawke's character Jesse is now an author, a well-known author, who has written a book that is very similar to the events that happened 9 years before, meets Celine by chance. She sees him at a reading in Paris, and they spend an afternoon together. And the next one, Before Midnight, happens 9 years after that, or 10 years after that, where they are a couple. They have 8 or 9 year old twin daughters and are reaching a moment where they're trying to determine whether they should split up or stay together. It's ultimately, I would say, throughout the course of anything I've ever watched in film, it's the most real feeling of a growth in a relationship, an organic growth, not together, not the way when you say, a relationship's going to grow, you automatically think, especially in the film context of people growing together. It's the way that people grow independently of one another, and throughout the course of their relationship with one another can grow together and grow apart in completely different ways. It's the most real. It is the most, and I will say this to the day I die until somebody proves me otherwise. It's the most real film relationship I've ever seen. Ever. And I think that is totally brought to life, not just by Richard Linklater, because he wrote a brilliant first script for Before. Essentially, so just to give a little bit of background, I don't think I've ever talked about this, at least to an extent. In the first film, and Before Sunrise, he had wrote this script and cast Julie Delpy, who is pretty hot off of Kieslowski's White. She was much more of a star internationally than Ethan Hawke was. And
Kieslowski is the filmmaker, and the film is White.
White, yes.
Just so you're not looking for a movie called Kieslowski's White.
No, Kieslowski did
yes.
the Trois Couleurs, which is blue, red, and white.
Yeah.
And Julie Delpy was kind of the femme fatale in White. But basically, he cast both of them through a lot of rehearsal and a lot of practice of them trying to kind of hone out these roles. And apparently about halfway through filming, they both started coming to him and just being like, I don't feel like this is what Jesse would say. And she would be like, I don't feel like this is what Celine would say. And as Richard Linklater said in his early interview, you have to put your ego aside and you kind of have to say, okay, how are you going to work with these actors? And so he started to basically let them write their own dialogue and to kind of tweak it here and there. And he said they mostly still stuck to structure as far as what was supposed to be happening in the script, but you saw an inherent trust happen with them. So apparently what happened, and I mentioned Waking Life earlier as my first film, Celine and Jesse show up in Waking Life. They are actually in a scene in Waking Life where they're talking about dreams. And it's a fantastic moment because they both – Linklater didn't write it. Both of them wrote it. Yeah. He explained, because they had all been on email chains and been writing back and forth, he explained the movie he was making, and they were like, oh, that's a really cool concept. And then they came up with the idea of basically writing the scene. So then they all of a sudden started bouncing emails back and forth, and they would write 4 or 5 lines back and forth one another. Here's what Jesse would say. Well, where's Jesse right now? Where is Celine right now? What are they doing? And then apparently one time at some point in 2003, all of a sudden Julie Delpy, wrote Linklater like 10 pages, like a monologue, and said, like, kind of like in a midlife crisis sort of mode. Like, this is Celine, kind of Julie Delpy in a midlife crisis. Yeah. And they said, we should do this. And they got back together, and they all wrote the script together. They collaboratively wrote it. And I still remember when that movie came out, I remember that it was filmed entirely in France. The French, I mean, they went just so...
Is that his only movies that don't take place in Texas?
Yes.
Wow. That's crazy. So. Yeah, because I think you're right, because I know he reset Suburbia in Texas. It's really supposed to be in Maryland.
Right.
And most of his stuff he resets out there, but that's very interesting.
I believe so.
Wow.
Yeah, I'd have to think hard about otherwise. I mean, Scanner Darkly might take place in the Midwest somewhere elsewhere, but...
Well, and Me and Orson Welles is in New York, but...
Right. I mean, if we're talking about period stuff, then that may make things a little different. Anyways, So it was this beautiful revisitation of these characters in a context 9 years later for the second movie, and it was a smash. I still think critically it's his biggest movie because it has like 100% rating on Rotten
critically,
Tomatoes.
yeah.
I remember international critics were just like, "This is the best American film in a decade."
Yeah.
And people were like, "This is the best American film since Woody Allen made Manhattan." Like people were saying it was that good overseas. And I tend to agree with them because I still think overall the second film in that trilogy is probably Linklater's best film. But Before Midnight is a beautiful movie on its own, which is the third chapter, which of course was then almost primarily, like Linklater had very little to do with the writing of the movie. It was almost entirely Julie Delpy and Ethan Hawke. And they brought in their experience to where they had been at that point, and they thought they conceptualized where they were as characters, and at this point they're experienced enough as directors on their own and as actors on their own that they knew what to do, and it was all about Linklater trusting sort of and guiding sort of the expertise at that point of their actors and understanding like this is the point. I mean, and there's a scene in the movie where Julie Delpy is topless for about 30 minutes straight, and it's so ferociously and fearlessly performed, where it's just like this is middle age. Like what?
Yeah, they don't care. What is she hiding from?
What titillates you at this point? And it's so smart. It's just so smart and it's so brilliantly conceived. I think that it ends on a kind of a weird note, which I like, where it's ambiguous. However, the second of the films is definitely the best. I feel like the first was a little meandering, which isn't bad because they're young. And I
love the ending of the first. I remember why. I like the.
And the last is a little dour because they're old. But in the middle is the kind of the hopeful chapter, but also the one where they're the most conflicted, and it ends up being the most effective
because they're all in transition.
But exactly, yeah. And so it's a perfect sentence ellipses. Sentence period sentence. I mean, it's just this perfectly constructed paragraph of film, and I've never seen anything like it. I don't think I ever will again. And it couldn't have been done again. It couldn't have been done by anybody but Linklater, in my opinion. The closest I would come to is a Woody Allen on the very top of his game, completely abandoning his own shtick, because he's done a lot of stuff in the vein of some of those moments within the context of those three movies where it's more about the character and about them serving the character. But again, I'm a Woody Allen fan, and I feel like Linklater does what Woody Allen couldn't have done in those cases.
He steps aside.
Exactly.
It's kind of great, and I think and that leads into my kind of my final one here. This is another one that I've talked about it before on the podcast, so I'll be a little brief with it, so we don't keep you guys too long past your bedtime out there.
Right.
But yeah, so this kind of ties it together, and this is so Suburbia was a very large cast. Me and Orson Welles takes it down to mainly 3 people, but there's a lot of supporting characters bringing things to life. And then there's this one, which is Bernie, which was one of the ones we actually even talked about when we were coming up with this podcast idea. And Bernie is the second time that Linklater worked with Jack Black. The first time he worked with him was on School of Rock, which is just a fantastic movie. It's
Chillo.
It's great. It's just had to get a little chillo in there. I love.
Everyone's seen School of Rock, and that's the thing. Is like School of Rock is eternal and never will die.
It is so much better than it has to be. Because if you look at let's look at our childhoods a little bit, or at least this movie probably was on both of our child lists. But we had a movie like School of Rock, and it was called Kindergarten Cop. It is not a good movie.
No,
I love that as a kid, we loved Not a Tumor was spoken every day as much as it could be. It was a huge catchphrase. And then you look at something like School of Rock, which is essentially doing the same sort of story where there's a man out of place that's got to deal with these kids and this stuff. But it is done with such a care and a joy to it. And what I love that he does in that movie also is the surrounding cast and the surrounding storylines that are going on, especially Joan Cusack, who just fucking kills it in that movie, is such a good addition. So he's worked with Jack Black. He reads this article about a guy named Bertie Tita. It's a real story. This guy was a mortician and a local theater guy in his town. He was really good friends with this old widower, and they would travel together and they do all this stuff. And he killed her. Spoiler alert, he killed her. And they made a movie out of this, and they cast Jack Black in this role, and it's really fascinating to watch. They show a lot of footage at the end of the movie, even, of the real Bernie Tiede. And they're not physically necessarily the same, but Black nails the temperament and just enough of the voice of it. And I'll give you a quick clip that he does in the movie, which is basically he's putting on a symposium, not symposium, it's a tiny group of morticians, and he's teaching them how to prepare the body. So this will give you a little idea of what he's doing in it.
The last detail to be managed is the deceased's body position. Left hand over the right, over the umbilicus, in an attitude of ease, of repose, of retirement. The position of the head is oh so important. Neither stargazing nor navel-gazing, but perfectly centered, turned ever so slightly to the right in greeting.
He's got this very just simple thing, and he's playing opposite Shirley MacLaine as this terror of a woman. She's just the meanest, cattiest old bag. He's very effeminate. It's very much hinted at in the movie that he's not really he doesn't have any female relationships. This is this sort of mother figure. And you watch him slowly lose it with this old woman who's just the opposite in temperament of everything with him. And it's a very simple story, but there are a couple things that Linklater does that are really amazing with it. Number one, and I remember it caught me off guard because I wasn't sure what I was looking at. The movie is shot like a movie, but ever so often there are these interstitial interviews with townspeople.
And they're
talking
real.
about Bernie. And at first, because I didn't, when I watched the movie, I didn't know that these are the actual townspeople, because they're also cross-cutting it with Matthew McConaughey in the third time he worked with Richard Linklater, as a marshal that's talking about the case after the fact. I knew this guy was up to whatever, but they'll get these townspeople, and I remember watching, going these people are really good. These guys are killing it. These townsfolk, and you find out they are the actual townsfolk that knew the real Bernie Tiede. And it's such a great blurring of documentary and film, especially when it's done so well that you really can't tell. If you don't know, you eventually catch on a little bit that they're not quite polished enough to be actors, but it's kind of amazing. And everything about this movie, and I mean, even the opening move of the movie is a 2.5 minute credit sequence set to Jack Black singing along.
I am
the master of the sea.
Yep.
Heard my despairing cry from the north.
And he's in his car driving through Texas
singing Christian music.
Love
lifted me when no one else could help.
Love lifted me.
It's literally, he's so happy in this car, and then you immediately dive into this old lady that's just misery and dour, and I was just it's such a rich, great opening. And it's one of the few movies I remember. I'll bring movies out to my mom. It's funny, two of the movies on my list from this, me and Orson Welles and Bernie, were movies that she really responded to and wanted to show as many other people.
Nice.
And I think that's kind of what Linklater does, is he hits for a lot of people, but I think especially for certain people, he hits a note with certain things where it's you inherently identify with something in the characters or in the way he's presenting things. And I think that's kind of the through line, because Bernie is not anywhere similar to Dazed and Confused from a plot or even character standpoint. Or me and Orson Welles, or the Before series. No. All of these crazy different movies, but there's always something that feels genuine. to what he does. And I think that's I'm super happy we got to actually do this. And I think for me, there's a host of other filmmakers I'd love to kind of dive into, some bigger, some smaller.
And there are lots of other great Linklater films that we didn't even get to mention. We didn't mention Tape. We didn't mention, we didn't get really into the Newton Boys, which is its own sort of thing. We didn't talk about. Everybody Wants Some, which is
which is a great movie,
a great movie, which is a very recent
the prequel to Everybody Gets Some, which is a much better movie. But and also, so my favorite part of preparing for the podcast is. Oh shit, Richard Linklater has a new movie coming out called Where'd You Go, Bernadette, starring Kate Blanchett, Judy Greer, Kristen Wiig, Lawrence Fishburne, Billy Crudup. Comes out in August. So we're going to give our plug for the episode to the 18 people listening to us. Go watch Where'd You Go, Bernadette. I don't know how Linklater and Kate Blanchett go wrong. I can't see that being a thing.
It's going to be good. It's the same it's going to be as probably Last Flag Flying, which was a fantastic movie, which everyone should go see or watch it.
You saw that?
Yes.
We didn't talk about this.
It's fantastic.
I really wanted to see it, and I was so concerned it was not going to be good because it didn't get a lot of
so good.
Oh, fuck.
It got great reviews. I mean, and people just didn't watch it.
I remember watching the preview with you, and you were like,
It's Carell and
Cranston and Fishburne. Yeah.
It's so good.
Okay, I'm super excited about it because I kept seeing it. It was one of those things that kept popping up on my radar.
It's really smartly done. It's very smart. So anyways, yes, you can go watch Last Flag Flying, and then next month you can go watch Bernadette.
I think what it is, and that you're going to really hate me for what I'm about to say. I'm just going to warn you.
Why?
I get confused sometimes with when a movie will show up and there's a director attached to it, and I get it confused with another director. So Last Flag Flying, I thought was a Cameron Crowe movie, and I get Linklater and Cameron Crowe confused sometimes in theory.
I'm not surprised because you know what? Say Anything almost feels like a Richard Linklater movie before Richard Linklater had a career.
I wasn't sure. I thought you were going to be like, are you kidding? There are so many complete different... Because I'm a big Cameron Crowe fan, which I honestly thought about during this podcast would be another fun director to do a dive into movies
Absolutely.
Of. But yeah, I do feel they have a
similarity.
feels
similar to a... Say Anything feels like almost like a Richard Linklater movie.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Okay, well, thank you guys so much. That was fun. I like that one. That was good. God bless you, Richard Linklater. Keep making great movies. I will be in the theater to see Where'd You Go, Bernadette. We will provide a review of that movie in a month.
And in the meantime, I will try to stop calling you so much.
And I will also watch Empire Records so I can definitively say that Dazed and Confused is a better movie than Empire Records.
Cara Delevingne. Nick will try to stop calling you so much.
This is true. He will. Well, but he won't stop calling. He's gonna.
But he won't stop calling. And he won't stop calling. And he won't stop calling. And he won't.
He needs those brows, baby.
He won't stop calling. And he won't stop calling.
Okay. Oh, and also, Linklater's preparing a Bill Hicks biopic. Come on. This guy's great. All right. Thank you so much, for listening to the New Way podcast. We will be talking to you soon. We are almost at 100 episodes, guys.
We're getting there.
We are so close. We have a lot of fun things planned for you on that episode. We're working on them, slaving over a hot keyboard.
Let's do it.
And Ben's writing some music. So keep tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time. Cheers.
Cheers.
Everybody get some.